Hello, everyone. Welcome to our August 2021 webinar for Southern College of Optometry on mastering the admissions interview. We'll be getting started in just one moment. Alrighty, welcome again to our 2021 August admissions webinar on mastering the admissions interview. My name is Avery Cunningham. I am a student services and admissions officer here at SCO. I'm one of the admissions team members who answers your questions around admissions and participates in the admissions process. Before we get started, I ask that we all use proper Zoom etiquette by keeping microphones muted unless speaking, limiting background noise, and respecting all of this webinar's attendees and facilitators. We will have time for questions towards the end of the webinar, but in the meantime, if you do have any questions or concerns that need immediate attention, please use your chat feature to communicate with us. Today, we'll be discussing the admissions interview. You'll be hearing from Mr. Joe Hauser, our Vice President for Student Services, and one of our faculty members, Dr. Cynthia Hud, talking about the interview essentials, the admissions process, what you should do to prepare before the interview, how you should conduct yourself during the interview, and then at the end, we'll have a faculty Q&A where Dr. Hud will discuss some of her recommendations for how a student can be most impressive and make the best impression during their interview experience. So, Mr. Hauser, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce yourself, and then we'll get started.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for attending. And Avery, thank you for setting this up. I guess my objective for trying to impart information here is how to prepare, but also to explain a little bit about why SCO interviews the way that we do with 23 schools of optometry. I think there might be 23 different ways in how schools conduct interviews. So as presuming that each of you are interested, maybe even started the application process, I do think it's always important to find out why a school interviews the way it does, and certainly we want to do the same thing as far as we're concerned. So let me see if I can get to the next slide here. So as far as what we're looking for in the interview, and this will be touched upon a little bit later, our interview format is a blind, no pun intended, or a closed file. So when Dr. Hurd or another faculty member is interviewing you, she will not know your GPA or your OAT score, or will have read your essays in advance. That is, of course, intentional. It forces the interview to be a little more open-ended and conversational. So some of the questions that we ask from the interview is to talk about your experience as far as optometry. So how did you come to choose optometry? Did you talk about your experiences, whether it be shadowing or working in the field? Did you compare optometry to other healthcare disciplines? And talking about your academic or college background, it's not so much did you make an A or B in biochemistry, but talking a little bit about your path, your overall experience. What were your challenges? What was a typical semester like? Did you take 12 hours or 18 hours or somewhere in between? What was your most challenging course and why? What was your most challenging situation and how did you overcome it? So again, our intent is for the interview to be very conversational. I personally think that allows Dr. Hurd and other interviewers to learn more about you, which is, of course, one of our key objectives. Um, and that final little bullet, as far as understanding the current and future state of healthcare and certainly optometry, is, this is a 40, 50-year career that you're about to embark upon. And we certainly want to make sure that all of our entering students have done their due diligence and knowing what optometry is about, especially since optometry can be practiced in such different ways. There's not one way to practice optometry. So we like it when an applicant has illustrated or demonstrated different shadowing modalities, different experiences. So we presume that they have a much more well-versed aspect as far as shadowing the field and healthcare in general. Like, for example, you may or may not know this, but optometry, as well as all healthcare, is a legislated profession. So what you can do as an optometrist in your state is dictated by your state board. And knowing that it is a legislative profession, that it behooves you and future optometrists and other healthcare providers to become active, and knowing this so that you're pushing your profession, so that making sure that you can do as a future optometrist everything that you have been trained to do, not only here at Southern College Optometry, but any school of optometry. So these are just some things that we're looking for overall as far as the interview is concerned. One of the first questions, in fact, I'm a backup interviewer, and one of the first questions I talk about or ask is about your work shadowing. And sometimes there's a question about which one is more important. Should I work for an optometrist or shadowing? And both have unique benefits. Typically, if you work for an optometrist, you get a little more into the details, and you get more in depth with patient care and why an optometrist does certain things, why his or her staff do certain, and just learn the inner workings of a practice more. In my humble opinion, the benefit of shadowing is that it allows you more diversity. If you're working either part-time or full-time, you may not have as much time to shadow in different places. Whereas in shadowing, even if you just spend one afternoon or 2 afternoons in different practices, you can pick up on unique aspects of what each optometry practice is trying to do. So there are certainly benefits of both. It's not that one is better than the other, but we do like to ask, what kind of experience do you have? And sometimes, as far as like what made an impression upon you when you shadowed or in your work experience, obviously we like to think that it made an impact on your choosing to pursue optometry, but what specifically, what was it from your shadowing and work experience? And being able to talk about that with your interview is something you should expect. The scope of the profession, I just mentioned that it is a legislative profession. You might want to have a discussion with your optometrist or different optometrists as far as what are the boundaries or the scope in the state that you're in. Or sometimes I think it's neat, especially if you're talking with an older optometrist, to see the evolution of the profession over the last 20, 30, 40 years. What can optometrists do today that maybe they couldn't 30, 40 years ago? What is on the horizon of what an optometrist can do in the years to come, I think is a great perspective for you to ask your optometrist or multiple optometrists as far as that. And specific interests in the field, I will certainly let Dr. Hurd talk about her specific areas of interest. But in my humble opinion, one of the beauties of optometry, and maybe one of the reasons you've chosen this wonderful field, is you can practice as broadly as you wish, or you can self-select or choose to focus your interests and talents on a special area. Your license, unlike medicine, provides a lot of flexibility. You don't have to do a residency. You don't have to declare that, okay, I'm only going to see pediatric patients, or I'm only going to see contact lens patients. I'm only going to see vision therapy or ocular disease. Your license allows for you to see anything and everything that your state provides, but some optometrists self-select or determine that they may only want to see or primarily see a certain area of the field, like vision therapy or pediatrics or low vision or contact lens, like ocular disease, sports vision, et cetera. So again, one of the benefits, if you expand your shadowing and talk with more optometrists, the likelihood of your learning more about these specialty fields might benefit you, because we certainly want for you to, again, to be aware that all of these options are at your disposal, not only when you enter optometry school, but more specifically when you graduate and start practicing. Boy, this first bullet here about ability of life school balance is really key. There's not a right or wrong answer to this question, but no matter if you have a 4.0, if you made a 400 or make a 400 on the OAT, you're still going to have a transition, an adjustment from undergrad to optometry school. If you take 16, 17, 18 hours in undergrad, that's a heavy load. But you might be taking only 2 or 3 science courses. In optometry school, you're taking 22, 23, 24 hours, and all of them are lab sciences. So there's always going to be an adjustment from undergrad to optometry school. And it's important, we stress this a lot, to make sure that you have an appropriate life school balance, that you're eating right, that you're exercising, that you have outlets, whether it's hanging out with your friends, watching movies, sports, whatever that necessary outlet is. You want to make sure you have that. But we like to see what kind of time management experience that you've had. So there's a lot of different ways that we can ask that question, but most interviewers will talk about or ask you about your life school balance. Are you working? Are you involved in activities? Just to get a flavor of a feeling of what kind of experience you have with your time management. High pressure situations. Again, you may or may not have had these so far, but we like to see your own response and reaction to stress, because again, when you're taking 23, 24 hours. Now, I've sort of painted maybe a little bit of a negative picture. So before I go any further, 99% of our students graduate. Let me let that sink in a little bit more. 99% of the students who enter Southern College of Optometry make it through the program. So it's not we're weeding people out, or it's impossible, or you can't do it. But there will be, you're about to become a doctor. Only 1% of the population has a doctorate degree. So it's not meant to be easy. So there will be pressure situations. We just want to make sure that you're aware of it, and that let's talk about it and how you handle it, and sometimes even what adjustments you need to make, if you need to make adjustments on how you have handled pressure situations in the past. Examples of adaptability and dealing with change. One of the things I'll stress here, especially for those of you that are science majors, you might be very well versed in memorizing. One of our now retired professors used to joke with students who at orientation, he would hold up a phone book. Now, I know many of you don't even know what a phone book is these days, but he goes, I bet half of you can memorize this phone book and spit it out on a test tomorrow. But what good would that be? When you're shifting from the natural sciences of the memorization and the volume of material that you will have to learn, that you've learned already and certainly will be learning in your first 2 years of optometry school, the key is adjusting that to a clinical setting. Can you demonstrate critical thinking, deductive reasoning, so that when a patient presents you with information, you're not just memorizing the information, and Dr. Hurd may touch on this later, but when a patient presents, whether it be with a case history or symptoms or statements of what's going on with her vision and eyes, she has to deduce and assess that information to come up with a diagnosis, and that's the clinical and critical thinking skills that are required in being a clinician. So we like to assess what experiences have you had with this? Ability and willingness to sacrifice. This may sound, again, a little more negative than what we really mean, but let's just be truthful. In optometry school, you might not have 6 hours a day to hang out with your friends or talking with your family, especially if you're moving to Memphis or moving to wherever you go to optometry school. Your family needs to know that, hey, I may not be able to talk with you 3 hours a day. I may not be able to go home every weekend because the demands of optometry school and the time demands are there. So when we say ability and willingness to sacrifice, it isn't meant to be too punitive. It just meant that, you may have less time at your disposal in the years of optometry school than maybe what you've experienced in undergrad so far. Mentioned just about, do you understand the commitment involved? If a student interviewing gives us the impression that their impression of optometry school is basically undergrad 2.0, that's a concern, because that means that student probably doesn't have a realistic grasp that, yes, you will be studying several hours a day, that you'll be taking a much heavier load, most likely, than what you have taken so far in undergrad. But again, let's go back to that statement. 99% of our students who enter finish the program. Do you have a realistic opinions regarding healthcare? I'll give an example here. If a student says, well, I chose optometry because I never want to take a call at night or weekends or any kind of emergency situations or anything along those lines. Now, an optometrist may not have the volume of emergency calls or weekend calls or things like that than, let's say, an OBGYN or a surgeon or other MD specialties. But you will have emergency calls. You will have sometimes work to carry with you. Now, again, I think optometry offers an incredible work-life balance as far as scheduling your week or your time, where whatever is important for you for your career and your personal life or family. But we also want to make sure that you're aware that patients will present. Not all emergencies happen at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Wednesday. So therefore, sometimes things will come up like that. And then again, just having a working knowledge of healthcare system, especially in your area, as far as if you're from Iowa and you've talked to your optometrist about how he or she co-manages patients in the healthcare system and network that they have, is good to have and know, so that again, when you enter optometry school, you have a pretty good understanding of how optometrists and other healthcare providers work together. So, that may come up on an interview as far as what kind of knowledge do you have of how your optometrists in your area work with other healthcare providers. So we just talked a little bit about what we're looking for in the interview. I think it's good to go over the admissions process, because again, why do we have an interview? It is to try to assess, do we think that you are a good match for optometry in our program? But also conversely, it's a wonderful opportunity for you to contact us and assess, are we a good program for you? And one of the things, again, that may come up in Dr. Hurd's session, I want to make sure that in the interview, one-on-one interview, another reason for it being one-on-one is it allows, in my humble opinion, a greater comfort area for you to ask questions. If it were a panel, if as nice as Dr. Hurd is, if there were 5 Dr. Hurds in front of you asking questions, it might be a little more intimidating, and you might not be as prompt or apt to feel comfortable asking questions of multiple people. But with a one-on-one interview, we have found that the applicant feels more comfortable asking the interviewer questions, and we encourage that. We want you to ask Dr. Hurd or others whether it be about what they do on faculty, what are the pros of SEO, what is it like living in Memphis, what is it like being a student, and of course also on the interview day you'll be getting a tour and you'll be interacting and meeting with other students. You'll get the opportunity to ask the students that aspect as well. So just going back to the admissions process, step one is of course you submit your Optomcast application and supplemental information. If you are looking to apply for this coming year for the entering class of 2022 or a future year, right now you're certainly not late, but the quicker you get the information in, we cannot invite you for an interview until we have received your full and completed and verified application. There's a lot of things we can do, but we can't do anything until you've submitted the application. Also, when you submit your application early, it allows us, and especially Mike Robertson, our director of admissions, the opportunity to give you feedback on maybe you need to do this or some things you have time to do it if you apply early. The later you apply, the less time you have to make those adjustments. So step one is the application is submitted, then process and transcripts evaluate. We want to make sure and see how you've done your classes. And also that kind of goes with the OAT as well. What is your grades and OAT scores like? Step three, initial review of the application along with a review of the OAT and transcripts. We want to review your essays, letters of recommendation, experience in the field. Sometimes that first review back to you might be from Mr. Robertson saying, John, just did an initial review of your file. You may have more experience than what your application indicated, but after reviewing your application, it looks like you only have just a handful of hours shadowing with one optometrist. May I strongly suggest that you get some more? Sometimes that's Mr. Robertson's first reply back to you, but he can only do that once he receives your application. So once the initial review is done, if again, Mr. Robertson is the one who, with input from others, but he's typically the one that makes selections for inviting an applicant for an interview. So if you've met a certain qualification for your GPA, for your OAT, and speaking of the OAT, we do not invite one for an interview until you have taken the OAT. We do sometimes accept the GRE or the MCAT. The OAT is still preferred because that's what most students take. It's easier to evaluate how you stack up compared to others. But you can have a 4.0, but if you don't have the OAT or another standardized test, we will not invite you for an interview until that comes in. Step 5 is the on-campus interview day, which also includes, again, a tour of campus, an overview of your file since the interview was a closed file, and also a housing and financial aid session. And we also encourage you, if you have time, to spend a little time looking around the city. We will give you information about where students live from a housing standpoint. You'll get recommendations from other students. So if you have a little time, that gives you a chance to not only see the campus, but also to see the city a little bit. And then finally, step 6, the admissions committee meets typically within 1 week after the interview and renders a decision. And those decisions, kind of the old-fashioned way, we usually just pick up the phone and call you to let you know of your acceptance, of course, followed by in writing. Okay, so just kind of another route here. Okay, you're invited for the interview. We're just kind of starting with the top of the screen here. The interview day, again, as referenced before, it is a blind interview. Dr. Hurd or the others, anyone else doing the interview, it's also one-on-one. Knows nothing about you. Well, I say that. They know your name and your home state. And of course, we do that intentionally. If Dr. Hurd doesn't know your GPA, it doesn't give her any biases. If you made a D in organic chemistry and you're worried, oh gosh, the interviewer is going to really hit me on this, she's not going to know. So we do that intentionally, both for the good and the maybe concerning stuff. So we don't want the interviewer to have any biases going into the interviewer, but basing their assessment on the discussion and conversation that they have with you. Again, I referenced this earlier, but since we have the chart here, since the faculty interview is a blind closed file. We have a counseling session. Ms. Cunningham, Ms. Sunny Ewing, Ms. Rebecca Smetana, Mr. Robertson, sometimes myself, we do the counseling sessions, which is the open file, like going over your prerequisites, strength of your GPA, OAT, letters of recommendation, etc. We have a financial aid and housing session over lunch on the interview day. And let me stress on the financial aid, you'll hear this on our interview day. We really want you to start thinking about, from a debt management standpoint, things that you can do to keep your debt in control. I think Southern College Optometry does as good of a job as any as far in our average indebtedness, certainly illustrates that, but you can still make bad choices. Our financial aid office, if you qualify for funds, can't turn you down, but they can show you, and I give them complete permission to show a little tough love if they feel like you are over borrowing. This is not monopoly money. You will have to pay this back. So we really try to instill upon all of our students that if you're serious about debt, you can't wait until your fourth year to be serious about it. It really starts from day one in making informed and judicious decisions. And sometimes that centers around housing, because that's a variable that if you live more modestly or you live with a couple of roommates, that can really shave a lot of costs or debt. So we try to give you some illustrations of that and firsthand accounts from students. And then after all this, there is a review, and the interviewer gives his or her recommendation to the admissions committee as far as your status, and then we review everything as a whole, and then of course communicate back with you as far as what your status is. Okay, things to think through: your travel itinerary. If you have a 9 o'clock interview and you look, oh, there's a flight arriving in Memphis at 8 that morning, I'll take that flight. That's kind of cutting it a little close as far as showing up on time. You don't want to be rushed. You don't want to be stressed. So whether you're driving or flying, you want to give yourself some cushion to make sure you get here on time. We certainly recommend spending some time in Memphis. You will get before the interviewer some recommendations, not only about like places to stay, things to do, things that are going on the weekend that you interview. Bringing guests for the interview day, totally optional and totally your call. I'd say it's about 50-50 as far as whether somebody brings somebody, whether it be a parent or a significant other or not. When asked, I say, what would make you feel more comfortable? I have 3 children. If I share with any of my 3 who are applying to grad school or professional school, hey, I'm going to go with you on the interview, I think they would all have a stroke and be so nervous. So I would not go with them unless they directly ask me. Some may feel that, hey, I really want for my parents or for my spouse or significant other to come with me. Totally your call, and it's about 50-50, so it's not a right or wrong answer. What to wear on the interview? I would, you're making a first impression. We may not critique about, oh, I can't believe that shirt doesn't go with that pants or anything like that, but dress professionally. For the gentleman, wearing a coat and tie is never ever going to offend anyone. And Dr. Hurd may have some more take on female attire, but just be professional. I want to be careful, but I wouldn't dress like you're going out to a formal dance or like going out on a Saturday night, but from a professional decor, what you would wear for an interview, just like what you would wear for a job interview, is I think a good parameter to base your decisions on. And then questions to ask. Well, a lot of it may depend upon your personal situation. Like, for example, if you have a spouse or significant other that if they come with you to move to Memphis, might be looking for a job or might be looking for school themselves and learning more about opportunities for them. If for you, the most important question in discerning or between optometry schools might be the kind of patient interactions or the kind of patient volume that you're going to be getting in clinic. Every one of our interviewers are not only faculty, but staff doctors. So you can ask Dr. Hurd, well, Dr. Hurd, what is a typical day like in the clinic from seeing patients, and what kind of diverse and challenging patient encounters are you going to get? You may have questions about board scores. You may have questions about the curriculum. Certainly feel comfortable asking. We have a lot to brag about. You may have already known, but for the last 3 of 4 years, Southern College of Optometry has had the highest board scores as far as the ultimate pass rate in the nation. And I just mentioned earlier that 99% of our entrants finish the program and graduate. So we have a lot of stats that are noteworthy and bragging rights. But ask whatever's important to you. Ask those questions, and not only you get an answer, but you get a perspective from whether it be from a faculty member or from a student. The only bad question is the one not asked. And I think that's a good mindset to keep. High-end questions or frequent questions that you might be able to predict. Tell me about yourself. An open-ended question. And a lot of the questions you'll be getting are open-ended. They want you to elaborate. They don't want you to yes, no questions. Why do you want to be an optometrist? Again, elaborate on what are the specifics that drew you to optometry. Career alternatives. What would you do if optometry doesn't work? It's not meant to be a trick question, but I think it's telling, hey, if I don't get into optometry school, I plan to do this. And there's not a right or wrong answer, but it does provide critical thought. If optometry school doesn't work out, maybe you're looking at something else in healthcare, or there's not a right or wrong answer to this question, but just allows the interviewer to see what kind of logical train of thought. And then again, anything else that you'd like to share. And then again, the questions of me, not to steal Dr. Hurd's thunder, but a lot of the interviewers will share, I can sometimes be more impressed by the questions an applicant has of me than how they answer their questions. So that's a very, very key thing to think about, not only for SEO, but for all schools. Whatever questions you have, don't hesitate to ask on an interview day. Connecting with your interviewer. Again, this is kind of a, just food for thought, but put yourself in the interviewer's shoes. What will make their job easier to evaluate? Did you answer their questions? That's a key one. If an interviewer asks you about an academic struggle and you start talking about work or something like that, you're deflecting. You're not really answering or addressing their question straightforward. That might raise some signals. So definitely think about, as you're preparing for the interviewer, what will make it easier for put yourself in the interviewer's position, empathize. Was the exchange pleasant? Was it communicative? Did you have a pleasant dialogue and exchange back and forth? Were you engaged and energetic? I mean, not over the top, but just simply, did you answer the questions? What kind of body language did you give the interview? If you're slumped, I know we're not with video here, but if you're slumped in your chair, you're giving a negative body language to the interviewer, like, I don't really know if they really want to be here. So you just want to portray yourself or be mindful of what kind of energy level, enthusiasm that you're providing. Did you give the interviewer something to work with? What we mean here, it can be frustrating if an interviewer asks you a question and either you're avoiding it or you're not answering it. The interviewer has to repeat or drag the information out of you. And here's why that's important. Remember, all the interviewers are in clinic, staff doctors. when you're in clinic working with these same staff doctors, the staff doctors, while the patient is there, is going to press you for, John, Jane, what are you thinking right now? Mrs. Smith has presented these conditions. What are your initial thoughts? What is your plan of action? Now, the staff doctor is there to make sure that Mrs. Smith gets good patient care or good vision care, but the staff doctor is wanting to find out where you are. And so that it gives them an assessment of your critical thinking. So it's good to provide the interviewer in answering the question directly. Was the interview fun? I don't mean to be so lighthearted with it, but if it's a more pleasant exchange, it's going to be more memorable and more positive versus, well, the applicant answered the questions, but they just didn't really elaborate much. They didn't really answer or didn't talk much. So I don't know if that's a sign that they're not interested. But again, just trying to be as energetic and as involved as possible. And then what is unique about you? If there are some things that you want the interviewer to know about you, you will have the opportunity to express that. Whether it is, hey, what's real important to me is service. And this is what I've done in the last few years, and why I think I would make a good optometry student is not only my intelligence, but my commitment to service, or whatever, again, that's important to you. And you want to make sure that interviewer knows about you. You'll have that opportunity to express that. And then just corresponding after the end, should you follow up with the interviewer? That's perfectly, it's not a requirement. It's not, if Dr. Hurd completes an interview, she's not waiting by her email, tapping her foot, waiting for an email thank you from you. But if you do, you know, that's perfectly fine. I will say, and I want to be, again, kind of careful how I explain this. It's not that Dr. Hurd, the interviewers are, have a lofty status of this, but I always think it's always beneficial when you're addressing your faculty, address them as doctor. It's not that Dr. Hurd or the other interviewers are, you know, hey, we're up here and you're down here, but it's just a sign of respect. And I think there's nothing wrong with, in any form of society or life or interactions of providing respect to those that have earned it. So if you do send an email to a faculty member or interviewer, I would say, Dr. Kerr, not, hey, Aaron, what's up? I think that's a professional and appropriate way to communicate with your interviewer. How to accept, delay, or decline an admissions offer. You will get an information from us, and we will share with you the timeline. If you decide to go to a different school, let us know. Because that seat that you're holding, or maybe even that scholarship that you're holding, can be passed on to another student. You have every right to take as much time as we have. Like this time of year, we give applicants 8 weeks to decide if you wish to submit a deposit. You can use the full 8 weeks. But if you have made a decision before then, you can certainly let us know. Now, if you're accepting it, then it's pretty easy. You submit your tuition deposit, and that holds your spot for the next class. And then how to follow up on suggestions and best next steps. Whether the interviewer or the admissions committee provides recommendations like some additional shadowing or whatnot, never a bad idea to ask for clarification. You can ask whoever's communicating that with you. Mr. Robertson, do I need to send you an email? Do I need to verify anything? And just follow that advice. If Mr. Robertson says, yes, we wanted you to get some more shadowing, why don't you just shoot us an email when you've received those extra 10 hours, or whatever the instructions are. Following that advice and following through is the best course of action. All right.
Alrighty, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Mr. Hauser. Everyone, Mr. Hauser will be remaining for the end of the webinar if you do have any questions for him during our through the Q&A section, but now we're going to turn it over to Dr. Cynthia Hud, who is a member of our faculty and one of our faculty interviewers. And we're going to be asking her some questions about her perspective on the interview process from the position of a faculty interviewer. Dr. Hud, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm Dr. Cynthia Hud. I'm a faculty member at Southern College of Optometry. I teach in the clinical program as well as in the didactic coursework during the second year of your program.
Wonderful, thank you. Alrighty, so getting started with some of the questions. For Dr. Hud, what are the first impressions you look for in an admissions interview?
When I first introduce myself to the individual, I look at how they interact with me. I also look at, the eye contact. Right now, we're not really doing handshakes, but being a professional all these years, we pay attention to, when someone grabs my hand, do they give me a firm handshake? So maybe one day we'll get back to that. But it's the little things that really make the difference because we are asked to give an impression of whether we think the individual is professional. So we do pay attention to whether the individual is casual. We also look at the clothes they might be wearing. I do realize that because of just the day and time we live in, it is okay to wear clothes that are a little bit more casual, but still look very well put together, like a young professional would be.
Wonderful, thank you. And then from your perspective, how does the fact that these are blind interviews impact the experience?
The blind interview is sort of interesting. I appreciated Mr. Hauser's discussion about why the blind interview is set up the way it is. And I do like the idea of just talking to the applicant and getting a feel for what got them interested in optometry. I really like to hear that part of their story because sometimes they will have a really interesting reason as to, what got their attention even in the first place. It might be an experience that that a parent or a grandparent had with their vision. Someone could have lost their vision because of an eye disease. And then that really drew their attention and it kept them looking into what optometry was about. The other thing that this goes back to the days when I was on a different faculty before I came to SCO, and we did the interview process differently. Mr. Hauser is exactly right in that everybody does their interview differently. So we used to have like 4 people sitting around a table with the applicant sitting there. That's a lot of pressure, I think. And we already knew what the person's application had in it. So everybody had their own question to ask, and we would just listen to see what the response was. But with the blind interview, the conversation can go almost anywhere. So another thing that I really like about it is the fact that when I'm talking to individuals and maybe they notice, say, a button or a lapel pin on my jacket, and then they ask me about it. And we may get into a really interesting conversation about something that we both are interested in, but we didn't know that until we met. So it can be very delightful. And that's one thing I really like about the blind interview, and that the individual can pretty much tell me what they want to tell me.
Great, thank you. And in addition to that first impression, how can a student stand out during an interview?
Well, the way they can stand out is to, like I said, just come across as as a professional. And like Mr. Hauser said, don't slouch, make sure you're standing straight up. Although I have to admit, I slouch. It's real easy to do. A firm handshake, a look in the eye, and even asking really good questions. A couple of weeks ago, I had an interview with a young lady, and as soon as we sat down, she started asking me questions. And for the first 15 minutes, I was answering her questions. And then I got to ask her some of the questions that I typically ask applicants to get a better feel for what they, how they got interested in the profession, and then some of the things they've done to solidify their interest in the profession.
Thank you. And what are, in your opinion, some of the most common errors students make during an admissions interview?
I wouldn't say that people make many errors. One thing, especially in regards to the blind interview, is when I asked a question, especially an open-ended question, it would be great for that individual to go ahead and volunteer information to me without me having to ask, 3, 4, 5 questions to get a little bit of information, because it will make things flow a bit easier. And the individual also comes across as a little bit more, how can I say it? Come across a little bit more flexible, and maybe just looking like they're comfortable in the process of our conversation, because sometimes people can come across as being really nervous, and I totally get that. And as soon as I recognize it, I tell them that, oh, don't be nervous. It's just me and you talking. So that does seem to ease their mind. And getting nervous is not something that we can necessarily help. Some of us are just like that.
Thank you. And what is an example, generally speaking, of the most impressive interview you've conducted, and perhaps the most unimpressive?
I would say one of the most impressive interviews I've done is when the individual has really good questions. Not only do they tell me why they got interested in the profession, but then they kind of walk me through a narrative and tell me what they've done in order to get themselves ready to come to professional school. And then they ask me questions about things that maybe they have read already or things they have observed. Because in this day and age, we have so much information available to us. There are interviews, there are blogs, there are vlogs, all sorts of things. So when they ask really good questions, I'm really, really impressed. And I take the time to answer their question, especially if we have time. The most unimpressive interview, I would have to say, I actually have an example in my mind about this particular interview because it was very awkward. It was a young man who, he came in and I introduced myself to him, and then as we were sitting there, he asked me if I was on the faculty, and I had just told him I was on the faculty, but I guess he wasn't listening. And he must have been kind of nervous and in his own head. And for the most part, I had to ask pretty much every single thing to find out, just what his preparation had been. And so that was something that it was a bit unfortunate, but I hope he moved on and was able to do whatever it was he was interested in doing. So that was kind of tough.
Thank you. And then our last question, what general additional advice would you offer to students who are anxious about the SEO admissions process?
I would say if a student is anxious, then get in touch with the admissions staff. Our staff is so good. They just know what they're doing from beginning to end. if they want to talk to someone who can kind of guide them to say information that they might be interested in looking at, or even reading so that they can educate themselves further, that would be something that I think would put their mind at ease. When it comes to the interview process itself and talking to one of the faculty members, like I said, it's like a conversation. So it's not something they have to study for, because they already know the answers. They just need to make sure that I know the answers. So so I would say if they're anxious, I think they can talk to people who are affiliated with the program to kind of ease their mind and remove that anxiety. Plus, our staff also can point them to students who might be from the state they live in, or from the area of the state, or even from the same undergraduate school. So they may end up talking to someone who's only a year their senior, who was there just a year ago, and they get to find out, what that person's experience was, and they learn, how they dealt with whatever it was that may have made them anxious.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Hurd. So now we're going to open it up to questions from all of our attendees. Please feel free to use the chat feature, which should be on the bottom of your screen in the icon bar. There's also a Q&A option as well that functions in the same vein as a chat feature. So please, I'll open it up to all attendees. If you do have any questions, go ahead and post them in the chat or the Q&A box. And this is for either Mr. Hauser or for Dr. Hurd. All right, we have a question from Jamie Stone. Hello, are masks required for the interview? I know several cities have reinstated the mask mandate, so I wanted to inquire and be prepared. Mr. Hauser, I believe, would you like to address this?
Sure, and let me preface that things are very fluid. We typically, for the interview day, follow our normal protocol. We do have live instruction, and for a few months in the summer, we did lift the mask mandate for those that were vaccinated. However, unfortunately, with the Delta variant increase a few weeks ago, we did reinstate the mask mandate. So since the mask mandate is for anything inside the tower, that would include the interview. We do allow, of course, when you're eating, you can take your mask off, and we do have a lunch session. So there are things that are fluid. So like, for example, when we did not have the mask mandate in our general areas, we still required for masks to be worn like in our clinic, in labs. So to answer the question right this minute, anything inside our campus indoors would require a mask, but that has evolved over the last 18 months, and I'm sure will evolve more over the next few weeks and months. But at this moment in time, yes, masks are required.
Great, thank you. Another question, would it be wise to submit an application before sending the OAT score?
Well, I guess that's for me, and the answer is yes, with a caveat. It takes, if you submit your OptomCAS application, all 23 schools require an OptomCAS application, it takes about 2 to 3 weeks for that application to be processed and verified and validated. So schools of optometry are not supposed to invite you for an interview or act upon your file until that time. So if you wait until you take the OAT, you might be creating a modest time bottleneck. Now, first of all, it's recommended to try to take the OAT as early as possible. But for any reason that you need to wait a little bit to take the OAT, it never hurts, in my opinion, to go, like, for example, if you're planning to take the OAT in 2 weeks, I would go ahead and apply today, because that gives time for your application to be processed. Once you take the test, you get your results immediately. And you can email those scores to us or any other school, and it does eliminate a little bit of the time bottleneck. Now, there might be some individualized nuances to that, like I haven't had any physics, or I haven't had any organic chemistry, or something specific. That might be a modestly different reply to the question. But first of all, I suggest trying to take the OAT as early as possible, like the summer before the year that you're applying. If you can't, or that's not feasible, the fall is about as late as you'd want to take it for the first time. But you want to get your application in timely as well, just to avoid any time bottlenecks.
Thank you. Next question, is there a time limit for the interviews?
Dr. Hurd, about how long would you say your average interview lasts?
My average interview is about, I tend to be a little long-winded, unfortunately. It might last 45 minutes to 50 minutes, but I'm very conscious of my time because I know they have other things to do.
And that's actually very much in line. Each interviewer does have his or her own style, and some might be closer to like 35, 40 minutes. Some might be closer to the 50 minutes. Typically speaking, the average interview lasts between 40 minutes to an hour. But I know a lot of you might have a little type A in you and want to overanalyze that. That's usually more indicative of the interviewer than your performance. So if your interview lasts 40 minutes and you come back and you're the first to finish, don't take that as a negative. That might be more indicative of the interviewer. Conversely, if yours lasts the longest, that's not good or bad. That's not necessarily a negative or a positive. It's often more indicative of the interviewer, but typically speaking, the interview is between 40 minutes to an hour.
Thank you. I believe we may have touched on this during the presentation itself, but I'll ask, how long does it generally take to receive a response after submitting applications?
Well,
Mr. Hauser.
as far as being invited for an interview or response after the interview about an acceptance decision?
Let's see, let's address both.
Okay, good. That's a good question. When you apply, it depends upon the competitiveness of your file and how complete your file is. So if you submit your application and you don't have an OAT, that's going to cause delays in responding back to you. If we don't have your essays or we don't have your letters of recommendation, that's going to cause some delays. And then, of course, I'll just say it like it is. If you have a 3.9 GPA versus a 2.9 GPA, we might get back with you sooner regarding an admissions interview based upon the competitiveness of your file. Now, I will say this, and our entire team, including Ms. Cunningham on this call, are wonderful about applicant inquiries. And sometimes it's as simple as, what can I do to make my file more competitive? So if you have a 2.9 versus a 3.9 and you have questions or concerns, our staff can talk to you about, well, show us this fall and have a really good term. Do as well as possible on the OAT. There are things that can be done to try to address what maybe modest shortcomings there might be with numbers. To answer the question about timetable of getting back with you after an interview, customarily our interviews are on Fridays, and we meet as an admissions committee usually on a Tuesday or a Wednesday of that following week. And then we split up and start calling. So more often than not, middle of the week after your interview, you'll get a phone call. I often joke, if it's a 901 area code, you might want to take it. That's our area code. So if you get a phone call from us, it will probably be within 4 or 5 days to a week after the interview.
Thank you. And then we have a question regarding prerequisite courses. If I am only missing one prereq course, for example, calculus, would I still be able to get into the school if I can take the course before I start the semester?
Absolutely. We require all prerequisite courses to be completed by matriculation or orientation. Like we have our orientation next week for the class entering this year, the entering class of 2021. We have already started interviewing and started accepting applicants for the class of 2022. So it's a lengthy process. So to answer the question directly, if you're lacking a prerequisite or you're graduating, as many would be in May, we realize that you still have some work to be done with coursework, etc. So what we do is if we accept somebody this time of year, it's called a tentative acceptance, which basically says if you were accepted under the terms that you or believe that you'll be finishing your bachelor's degree, which is the vast majority. Also, we expect your GPA to be somewhat in line with what you've done in the past. So if you had a 3.6 GPA, you got your acceptance letter and say, hey, I can blow off school now, and your fall transcript shows you made a 1.3, we might have to reconvene and reevaluate that. But yes, if you're lacking a prerequisite, especially a prerequisite that's not in line for the OAT like calculus is, go ahead, apply, take the OAT. And we even have students taking courses in the summer before matriculating. It's tight, but it still can be done. As long as you've completed the course, the prerequisite, prior to matriculation, prior to orientation matriculation, you're good.
Thank you. And then does SEO provide housing accommodations for applicants the night before the interview?
We do not. SEO does not have dorms. We're a private single-purpose school, so we're not affiliated with a major university. So we do not. Many of the optometry schools that are affiliated with major universities have dorms primarily because there's undergraduate students, and typically we have found that dorms are more attractive for younger students than, let's say, a 24-year-old doctoral candidate. So since all of our students are in the doctoral program, we have a little bit of an older student body than, let's say, what you would have from your undergraduate experience. So we give recommendations on nearby hotels close to campus. But those costs, including travel costs, would be borne by you.
Thank you. We have a question here. Is there a list of potential interviewers to allow for students to do research prior to the interview to be better prepared?
Well, I'm going to say something and get Dr. Hurd's take. And Avery, correct me if this is wrong, because this is a relatively new step in the process. So I apologize if I misspeak here. But when you're invited for an interview and you sign up for, oh, please sign me up for the Friday at 9 o'clock on September 15th or whatever day it may be. A few days before the interview, we send you an email confirming your date and time, which student will be giving your tour. And Avery, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe we referenced the faculty interviewer that will be interviewing you, so that you have in advance, the student that'll be giving my tour is a second year from Virginia, or a third year from Florida, or a third year from California, or wherever it may be. So we do provide that information, and I believe the interviewer as well. But Avery, I hope I didn't misspeak on that one.
No, I don't believe so. I believe it's only after you confirm that you're coming for the interview that you would hear who your interviewer is.
So I'll ask Dr. Hurd. Dr. Hurd, in your interviews, especially within the last year in doing that, have any of the applicants reference, oh, Dr. Hurd, I found out you were doing my interview a few days ago and I looked up your bio or something like that. I don't know if anybody's done that or said that to you before.
Actually, no one has said that before.
Okay.
And one other thing I want to say is I think our admission staff, they're so good at figuring out the connections, connecting the dots between the interviewers and the applicants. And usually there's like a common thread that we actually can talk about and get to know each other around that particular fact. So I kind of like the fact that that someone may be coming from Ohio and they may be an undergraduate student at Ohio State, and I went to optometry school at Ohio State. So there's that commonality, for example.
Great, thank you. And I believe the last question that I'm seeing here, what are some financing options you would advise people with? Also, are there good scholarship opportunities?
Yes and yes. One of the advantages of applying early, I don't know for sure if SEO offers the most scholarships, or what is wonderful is that for the class that's just about to enter, right at 80%, I think it's like 79.7, so I'll round up and say 80% of our students either have what's called a contract seat, which is there are about 8 or 9 states that provide like a subsidy for students, and or an SEO internal scholarship. So about 80% of our students pay a reduced tuition, either through the contract program or SEO scholarships. Those are offered on a rolling basis. So the more competitive you are and the earlier you apply. So getting your application, we've already accepted about 22, 23 students for next year's class. If we get a very strong applicant, it's not like we say, oh, but we might get a better one in tomorrow. We like to reward students who apply in a timely manner, get their stuff in a timely manner, etc. So scholarships are based upon academic excellence, based upon service leadership, time management, commitment to the profession, and also the earlier you apply, the greater the chance of those funds being available. Since also our scholarships, like on average, might be anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000. It's not going to pay for everything. So even if you were to get a contract seat and or a scholarship, you still will have some funds to owe. And that's where financial aid comes in. And I think our financial aid office does a wonderful job of walking you through the process and making sure that what we call, the term is called unmet need. If you declare, I have $3,000 that I can apply toward my studies next year, and here are your costs, then financial aid takes that difference and then works with you to get the best loans with the best terms. Now they try to minimize that by suggesting things like, hey, if you get a roommate versus living by yourself, that's probably going to save you $5,000 to $7,000 to $10,000 a year. So they counsel you and work with you, but I'll say this, you have to be willing to listen. Again, if you're wanting to graduate with the lowest amount of debt, you have to, in my humble opinion, keep an open mind to things like, yes, I will have a roommate that will share my cost and lower my indebtedness. I've got a 5-year-old car that's paid for. I don't need to go out and buy a Lexus as a grad student. Maybe I can wait. These are all the things that may make common sense or just rational sense. But students do make mistakes regarding their finances. And we're here to help you. But as a student, whether it's here at SC or anywhere else, I beseech you, keep an open mind and listen to the advice of the financial aid office, because they're there to try to help you have the funds that you need. And also, for 24 consecutive years, we've had a 0% default rate. What does that mean? For 24 consecutive years, our graduates have paid back their student loans without default. And over 24 years and 130 plus students in a class, that's well over 3,000 graduates that we're talking about. That's a pretty good track record when you're over 3,000 human beings and all of them are paying their loans back.
Alrighty, and then I'm going to say this is our last question since we've gone over a little bit. Does it look bad to the admissions committee when you have a set OAT exam date, but leading up to it, you don't feel as prepared as you should, so you push it back to a later date? I suppose maybe both Mr. Hauser and Dr. Hurd could address this.
Cynthia, do you want to, I don't know how much often this comes up in the interview comment, but I'll let you go first.
Sure. I would say in regards to something like that, you really have to know yourself. And if you really feel that you're not prepared, then don't set yourself up for failure. Just explain the situation, you know, if it does come up, and then do your best to get that OAT test done so that you can get that information in for your admissions packet so that the committee can make a decision as quickly as possible.
I totally echo that, and hopefully to maybe appease. In all my years of doing this, I rarely hear of a student acknowledging that they're a good standardized test taker. There tends to be a little bit of lowballing of your abilities. If you did well on your SAT, ACT in college, that probably indicates that you have a certain capacity to do well on standardized tests. The one thing that you want to be cognizant of is that if you need to retake the OAT, you have to wait 90 days. So if you need to push it back 30 days, that's usually not a problem, unless if you start to overanalyze it and start saying, I'm gonna push it back another 30 days and then another 30 days, and then all of a sudden you're late in the ball game. So what I always say is also not to be negative, but give yourself 2 shots at the test time-wise, so that I think it relaxes you. So like, for example, if you're taking the OAT today and you do okay, but you need to retake it, you've given yourself enough time where you can take it again in November or even December, and it still can be in the running for this year. Whereas if you say to yourself, I'll just take it for the first time in December, you're giving yourself only 1 shot at the test. Dr. Hurd went to Ohio State. Rumor has it they play a little football at Ohio State. So let's give an analogy. Ohio State's playing Michigan, which I know hasn't been a very competitive series lately, but you're playing your arch rival. You win the game, you go to the college playoffs. You're down by a point, and the coach sends the field goal kicker in to kick a 50-yard field goal. If he makes it, Ohio State wins. If he misses it, Ohio State loses. A lot of pressure on that kick. In that game kind of situation, that kicker might be lucky to make that kick 50% of the time. Whereas in practice, he may make it 90% of the time. But the only difference is pressure. If you wait too late and you really only have 1 shot at the OAT, I think it may hamstring you a little bit and put a little undue pressure in it, and it restricts your performance. Whereas if you go into the OAT with the mindset, hey, I think I'm prepared, but I've also given myself ample time that if I need to retake it, I don't want to retake it for many reasons, but I've given myself time to retake. I think it relaxes you. And then ironically, it allows you to do better. So when I think it's very natural for students to second guess their readiness for the OAT. And as Dr. Hurd said, you just have to know yourself. Is it genuine anxiety and rightful a concern, or is it maybe just you're overanalyzing it a little bit? I think only you can answer that question for yourself, but be mindful. I think you always want to be mindful of whenever you set a date for the OAT as for the first time. A, make sure you have the courses completed, and B, give yourself time that if you have to retake it, you can. And in my humble opinion, it relaxes you and you perform better.
All right, since we've gone a little bit over time, I'm going to close out questions for now. But for all of our attendees, as you can see, the email addresses of Mr. Hauser and Dr. Hurd are on the screen. So please feel free to reach out with any additional questions you may have a little bit later as you reflect on the webinar. But again, this brings us to the end. I know we have covered a lot of information, but I hope this experience has been of assistance as you start on your optometric journey. Our next webinar will be held on Thursday, September 16th, 11 a.m. Central Time. And the focus will be the SEO campus and clinical facilities, where you'll be hearing from SEO student ambassadors, walking us through the campus and giving you some quick details about the experience of studying and being on campus, and also provide some quick history about Southern College of Optometry. For more information, if you haven't done so already, please fill out an inquiry form. You can see the link on your screen. You will receive a personal advisor and a personal brochure with information relevant to your goals and experiences. Also, all future online webinars will be posted on the link you're also seeing on your screen, and a recording of today's webinar will be available tomorrow. Thank you to Mr. Hauser and Dr. Hurd for sharing their time and experiences, and a special thank you to all of our attendees who have joined us. We hope to see you all at the next webinar in September. Have a great rest of your week and take care.
Thanks, everyone.